I'm press. I am press.
I don't care if you're down.
Okay, I'm down. I'm down.
I am press. Please, you.
We are at an extremely dangerous moment in the history of this country. Donald Trump wants to jail journalists who publish stories he doesn't like.
Do you mind telling me why I'm under arrest, sir? Why am I under arrest?
And he's wielding the Espionage Act like a chainsaw against journalistic sources.
We're gonna find the leakers. We're gonna find the leakers. They're gonna pay a big price for leaking.
Let that sink in for a second. At the same time that the US government is chasing journalists all over the world, they have decided that all foreign journalists have no protection under the First Amendment in the United States. So that goes to show the gravity of this case.
Oh.
Whoa. Oh.
Amelia, can you hear us?
Amelia, you okay?
And I'll ask the same question. Will you commit to not putting reporters in jail for doing their jobs?
Well, I don't know that I can make a blanket commitment to that effect. We will utilize the authorities that we have legally and constitutionally if we have to.
It's another attack on free press. Just like Julian Assange, after publishing information that exposed government corruption, Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept has been charged.
The claim the Brazilian government used against me was one modeled after the Assange indictment.
This is a war on freedom of speech, and it's a war on journalists.
The U.S. government is asserting universal jurisdiction to reach over to any journalist anywhere in the world that reports on it in a way that it doesn't like and prosecute them for doing so.
Mr. Assange was arrested this morning at about 10 o'clock at the Ecuadorian embassy. This precedent means that any journalist can be extradited for prosecution in the United States for having published truthful information about the United States.
Come on, fire.
First they came for Julian, they will come for everybody else. Our children, our friends.
There is a war on journalism, and Julian is at the center of that. But the point is that what happens to him can happen to any journalist who does his or her job.
How did we get here? The case against Julian Assange started a decade ago, but today it is the case that will define press freedom, and by consequence, your freedom of speech.
This is my philosophical background, how I see this work that we're doing, and maybe one other component, is that while we can all write about our own political issues, we can all push for particular things we can believe in, we can all have particular brands of politics, but I say it's all bankrupt. And the reason it's all bankrupt and all current political theories are bankrupt and particular lines of political thought is because actually we don't know what the hell is going on. And until we know the basic structures of our institutions, how they operate in practice, these titanic organizations, how they behave inside, not just through stories, but through vast amounts of internal documentation. Until we know that, how can we possibly make a diagnosis? How can we set the direction to go? Until we know where we are. We don't even have a map of where we are. So our first task is to build up the intellectual heritage that describes where we are. And once we know where we are, then we have a hope of setting course for a different direction. Until then, I think all political theories, to greater and lesser extents, of course, are bankrupt.
In 2011, a secret grand jury was meeting in Alexandria, Virginia, to consider indicting Julian Assange under the Espionage Act.
This isn't about who Julian Assange is, because that's been used so much as a distraction, and I think so much of the negative press about Assange has been exactly about that. It's been exactly about, oh, we'll get people to ignore what the issues are because we'll get them to be distracted that this is not an issue about press freedom. It's actually about an individual. It's not. It's about press freedom. You know, it doesn't matter who the individual was in that position. That position needs to be defended. And in this case, it is Julian, but the role that he undertook is one that absolutely needs defending by the rest of the media.
The Obama administration concluded that there was no way to charge Assange without endangering press freedom. However, in 2019, the Trump administration took a different approach.
In an unprecedented move, the Justice Department has indicted WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange for his role in publishing U.S. military and diplomatic documents exposing U.S. war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. But Assange faces up to 170 years in prison under the new charges, 10 years for each count of violating the Espionage Act.
Julian Assange has been indicted under the Espionage Act with 17 separate counts related to his work as a publisher with WikiLeaks for having received and published classified information. Journalists around the world, at The Guardian, at The New York Times, at Der Spiegel, at Le Monde, also received and published that information, but that's true of journalists around the world all the time receiving information from government, including from the United States government. It does not make them spies, and it does not make it espionage.
Assange is charged with soliciting and receiving classified information. That's what I do for a living. I solicit and I receive information. I ask questions and I hope to obtain answers. And where there's evidence available, I try to get the evidence.
Journalists in the so-called mainstream, in its various forms, are now realizing that it concerns them. They come for Julian Assange, they'll come for you.
All these practices of encryption, helping your sources provide information legally, are important for letting citizens and the world know what's going on. Otherwise, we're dependent on our government to tell us what's up. And I don't think that's a dependable way to get information out to citizens. They won't do that.
Welcome to the State Department. I think we have some interns in the back. Welcome. Good to see you in this exercise in transparency and democracy.
Is that what it is?
WikiLeaks is the most extraordinary development in journalism in my lifetime. WikiLeaks meant that everything you read was authentic, was accurate. You could judge it on its face value. There's no journalism, even the best, could never be 100% authentic and accurate.
In 2010, WikiLeaks started publishing the largest collection of US military and diplomatic secret documents in history. WikiLeaks first published a video of 2 American Apache helicopters murdering 11 people in Baghdad, among them 2 Reuters journalists.
This video, alongside maybe the images from Abu Ghraib, are in a sense what the Napalm Girl photo tells us about the Vietnam War. So it captures so many elements of the callousness, the bloodlust, and the horror of the Iraq War.
I'm all up. Come on, fire!
If you watch it through, there's nowhere to go after it. You can't be rationalized. It can't be excused.
You don't need to be a specialist to see that US soldiers have been intentionally massacring people.
Come on, buddy. All I gotta do is pick up a weapon.
Even if some of them had carried arms, once they're wounded and out of combat, targeting them becomes a war crime. So it's obvious.
Go ahead. Roger, we have a black bongo truck picking up the bodies. Request permission to engage. Bushmaster 7, Roger. This is Bushmaster 7, Roger, engage. 1-8, engage. Clear. Come on. Clear. Clear.
It was murder. 360-degree killing. That was the so-called philosophy of the war. In other words, you killed everything within 360 degrees.
The collateral murder video wasn't an isolated incident. WikiLeaks then published the Afghan and Iraq war logs, nearly 500,000 documents of detailed incident reports conducted by the US that depicted the true cost of those wars.
I'm not surprised by the data. What I am is deeply upset by the data. It's impossible to read the data. When you read about a 6-year-old being tortured to death with a drill, when you read about an entire family being wiped out in a split second because some 18-year-old American soldier has decided that the car was going too fast and just opened fire, when you hear about people being locked in a prison for 2 months and suspended from the ceiling by the Iraqi military, when you read stories about entire towns being decimated or children being killed by Hellfire missiles fired from US Apache helicopters because they were gathering firewood, all these stories are horrific. It's painful.
It is up to a court to decide clearly whether something is in the end a crime. That said, prima facie, there does appear to be evidence of war crimes in this material. Example is the Task Force 373 HIMARS missile strike on a house which killed 7 children. Well, we would like to see this material, the revelations that this material gives, be taken seriously, investigated by governments, and new policies put in place as a result, if not prosecutions of those people who have committed abuses.
No one has been prosecuted for this. We have clear evidence for systematic torture. Again, the whistleblower is the one who's being prosecuted, but not the perpetrators.
For just the third time since he was arrested over 2 years ago, alleged Army whistleblower Bradley Manning was seen by the public this week. His 3-day pretrial hearing wraps up today before a military court at Fort Meade in Maryland. Manning faces 22 charges, including the capital offense of aiding the enemy, as well as violating the Espionage Act, computer fraud, and theft of records. The 24-year-old private is accused of leaking hundreds of thousands of documents to the whistleblowing website WikiLeaks, including secret files on the Iraq and Afghan wars. Manning's attorneys are seeking the dismissal of 10 of the counts.
A few months after, WikiLeaks released Cablegate.
That's the scale of it, a vast leak of thousands of documents from US embassies and other diplomatic outposts across the globe in all those countries. There are stories from every country involved that will embarrass, intrigue, and potentially complicate international relations.
Among the specifics, worries about security at a Pakistan nuclear facility. Concern about alleged links between the Russian government and the mafia, plus allegations and examples of corruption within the Afghan government.
Britain's Guardian newspaper said some cables showed Saudi King Abdullah repeatedly urging the U.S. to attack Iran to destroy the program, and that leaders of other Arab nations referred to Tehran as an existential threat. Those documents...
I think for the general public, it was quite a revelation that people who have all the privileges of diplomats actually were behaving like thugs.
Italy's foreign minister calls the document release the September 11th of world diplomacy, in that everything once accepted as normal has now changed.
It was truth-telling of the most powerful kind, the most fearsome kind, almost, and of course there was a reaction.
The United States strongly condemns the illegal disclosure.
I think the man is a high-tech terrorist. He's done an Assange. Yes, he's done an enormous damage to our country, and I think he needs to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And if that becomes a problem, we need to change the law.
The way to deal with this is pretty simple. We got special ops forces. I mean, a dead man can't leak stuff. This guy's a traitor, a treasonist, and he has broken every law of the United States. The guy ought to be and I'm not for the death penalty. So if I'm not for the death penalty and want to do it, illegally shoot the son of a.
He's going to talk about WikiLeaks. You had nothing to do with the leaking of those
I think
documents.
it's disgraceful.
You do think it's disgraceful?
I think there should be like death penalty or something.
That reaction we now see encapsulated in the almost desperate bid by the United States to put Julian in a black hole and throw away the key. That's what they're talking about if he's extradited.
There is an attempt now, a very worrying attempt in the United States to erect a new precedent, which is that in the national security sector, that any journalist that corresponds with a source is committing espionage if at some time a classified communication is made. If I am a conspirator to commit espionage, then all these other media organizations and the principal journalists in them are also conspirators to commit espionage.
It's absolutely true. Yes, that's absolutely true. I spotted that. I was so excited about the fact that this conceals the fact they called it air support. There's a Reaper UAV which proceeded to loose off a Hellfire missile, which most probably 2 children with shrapnel.
With increasing pressure due to the publications, Julian Assange feared an imminent extradition to the US, and in 2012 was forced to seek asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy.
El gobierno del Ecuador, fiel a su tradición de proteger a quienes buscan amparo en su territorio o en los locales de sus misiones diplomáticas, ha decidido conceder asilo diplomático al ciudadano Julian Assange.
Can you hear me? I asked President Obama to do the right thing. The United States must renounce its witch hunt against WikiLeaks. The United States must dissolve its FBI investigation. The United States must vow that it will not seek to prosecute our staff or our supporters. The United States must pledge before the world that it will not pursue journalists for shining a light on the secret crimes of the powerful. There must be no more foolish talk about prosecuting any media organization, be it WikiLeaks or be it the New York Times.
¿Por qué se dio el asilo a Assange? Assange me parece que entra en la embajada en julio. Casi 2 meses nos pasamos estudiando el caso de Julian Assange. Ni siquiera te puedo decir es que estábamos de acuerdo con todo lo que había hecho Assange. Pero era claro que no había garantías para un debido proceso. Era claro que desde Estados Unidos ciertos grupos tremendamente agresivos, los halcones norteamericanos, querían juzgar a Julian Assange. Había grandes probabilidades de su extradición a Estados Unidos, donde podía enfrentar incluso la pena de muerte.
And so began Julian Assange's 7-year-long stay inside the tiny Ecuadorian embassy in central London.
Can everyone hear me? Hello, Cambridge, can you hear me? I can hear you, Andrew. I can see a room. Just nod or wave if you can hear me.
My name's Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as an infrastructure analyst for NSA in Hawaii.
29-year-old young man in a foreign jurisdiction that he had no experience with, the subject of the largest intelligence manhunt the world has ever seen. And the realities were, for Edward Snowden, knew he was going to be smashed. And at that moment, he reached out and asked us for help. We managed to get him out of Hong Kong. But when he landed in the Moscow airport, the American government had cancelled his passport.
While all of these news organizations around the world, all of these publishers were trying to get a piece of the story, there was only one publisher that actually said, we want to help the source. We want to make sure he's okay. We want to make sure that no matter what happens, you know, he has somebody on his side. And that was WikiLeaks.
En el momento que pasa Snowden, se cierran las puertas diplomáticas. O sea, eso fue un cerrón de puertas en Reino Unido. Eso cerró las posibilidades de discusión y negociación. O sea, ese fue el precio por la libertad de Snowden fue la libertad de Julian.
Assange was aware of the possible consequences of helping Snowden.
I think that is an important lesson, that actually an organization that specializes in defeating surveillance for national security cases was the organization that was able to do this. Yes, we had some diplomatic contacts and we certainly had the will and the desire to not see another Chelsea Manning. But I think a lot of it, we couldn't have done that if we hadn't specialized in these secure communications techniques.
Despite the increasing threats and deteriorating conditions in the embassy, WikiLeaks continued to publish.
Some of the CIA's most sophisticated and effective spying tools apparently pried open tonight with the help of WikiLeaks. The anti-secrecy group says it's obtained thousands of files.
The CIA is equipped with a variety of hacking tools to crack into phones, cars, computers, even smart TVs.
As a result of these publications, in 2017, the newly appointed director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, in an unprecedented manner, dedicated his first public address to a publisher.
Julian Assange and his kind are not the slightest bit interested in improving civil liberties or enhancing personal freedom. They have pretended America's First Amendment freedoms shield them from justice. They may have believed that, but they are wrong. WikiLeaks walks like a hostile intelligence service and talks like a hostile intelligence service.
The private security company UC Global, hired by Ecuador to protect Assange, cut a deal with the CIA to spy on Assange and the Ecuadorian diplomats.
Together with these is the immediate accessibility to the newest major exposition, convention, and meeting facility in the city of Las Vegas.
In 2016, the owner of UC Global, David Morales, flew to Las Vegas to attend a security fair.
As soon as Morales returned from this fateful trip to Las Vegas, he began bragging to his employees back in southern Spain that we will from now on be playing in the first division, using a soccer metaphor, a football metaphor. But they were violating their contract with Ecuador and secretly working for the Americans via Sheldon Adelson.
The CIA laundered payments to UC Global through Las Vegas Sands, a company owned by Trump megadonor Sheldon Adelson.
Una persona que no se identifica, me contacta, me llama por teléfono y recuerdo perfectamente que cuando comienza la conversación me indica: hola, tú no me conoces, pero yo a ti sí te conozco perfectamente. Entonces yo le pregunto, ¿pero y de qué me conoces? Y él me indica: te conozco porque durante mucho tiempo has sido uno de mis objetivos. Te he seguido, te he grabado, he escuchado tus conversaciones, tengo toda tu documentación personal, tu pasaporte. Durante un montón de tiempo has sido uno de mis principales objetivos.
An elaborate plan was set up between Morales and the CIA to install surveillance cameras with audio capabilities and implant covert microphones in strategic places, such as below this fire extinguisher in the embassy's meeting room and behind this box in the toilet. Assange held meetings in this toilet for fear of being spied on.
En lugar de proteger a Julian Assange, se dedicaron en forma absolutamente ilegal, atentando contra el derecho a la privacidad, atentando contra los derechos humanos, a espiar a Julian Assange, cooptados por la CIA.
the CIA's increasing obsession to entrap Assange alarmed a UC Global staffer who blew the whistle when asked to target Assange's family and even plot an attempt against his life.
They came forward and they spoke to our lawyers and they exposed what had been going on there because they had played a part in it. And they said that what their boss had been telling them is that they were working for the CIA and that those instructions about getting Gabriel's DNA, that was coming from the other side of the Atlantic. These instructions were coming from the United States.
It reads like some really terrible spy novel. Plots to kidnap, plots to possibly poison Julian Assange while he was in the embassy. I mean, it's almost too crazy to be real.
And it is real. It's hard for people to understand that such lawlessness is possible. So there's incredible criminality that has been going on in order to gather information about Julian's lawyers and his family and journalists who were visiting him. I mean, it's shocking, and I'm very fearful. I've been in a permanent state of fear for years.
UC Global sent video, audio, and other information about Assange, WikiLeaks staff, his visitors, and the Ecuadorian diplomats to a CIA server. They also recorded Assange's medical consultations and went as far as recording Assange's privileged legal conversations with his lawyers.
When Daniel Ellsberg was on trial for the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam War, his case was thrown out because it came out that Nixon had ordered a raid on his psychologist's office to try and get information which was embarrassing to Ellsberg. So, of course, that should have happened, and it was right that it happened. Assange has been surveilled by the CIA. That by itself should mean the case is thrown out. There's no chance you can have a fair trial if the people who are prosecuting have been surveying the defendant as he's been having privileged conversations with his lawyers. It's completely irregular that it hasn't been thrown out on those grounds already. I mean, really is outrageous.
I didn't expect to find torture, to be honest. I thought, well, this is, the UK, they've arrested him, they'll treat him well, maybe there's some issues, procedural issues, but I was genuinely shocked then that we found all the symptoms that you would find typically in a person who has been exposed to psychological torture. And in that context, I have to stress that psychological torture is by no means torture light. It is very serious. In fact, psychological torture was initially systematically developed by the Nazis. When they were not able to break resistance fighters with physical means, they developed psychological torture because it was even worse.
He was arrested in April 2019. Within a couple of months, probably less, he'd lost up to 15 kilos in weight. And his brother Gabriel, who I went in to see him with once, was shocked when he held his arm and realized how thin he was. He was subjected to a psyops operation, I would think. It certainly had its effect on him physically and no doubt mentally.
Torture is being used against Julian Assange to intimidate the world, to show them, if ever you get the idea to disclose our secrets and to expose our dirty laundry to the world, this is what's going to happen to you.
I feel like Julian's life might be coming to an end. It's been 10 years, 10 years of breaking someone down, of trying to destroy his life. And it's a well-known pattern, whistleblowers, people who expose the powerful, they destroy them.
Throughout the 10 years that the Assange case has been ongoing, there have been a number of irregularities. The destruction of evidence by prosecutors, arbitrary detention, lack of access to his lawyers, judges with alleged conflicts of interest, mistreatment, illegal espionage, and the political nature of the charges themselves. All this is reason enough to shut the extradition proceedings and the prosecution down, but Assange still faces 175 years in prison.
Julian Assange is now in a high security prison in conditions which are quite close to solitary confinement, where he is at serious risk of contracting COVID simply because of an indictment from the Trump administration in respect of publications for which he's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, publications for which he won the Walkley Award for Most Outstanding Contribution to Journalism. That's how stark this situation is.
Come on, buddy.
We started by looking at the husband of the Chief Magistrate, Lady Arbuthnot, who's made a number of rulings on the Assange case. We found that her husband was a Conservative Defence Minister. He financially benefited from corporations that had been exposed by WikiLeaks. We then did an investigation of her son, who is a cybersecurity expert and the vice president of a private equity group. And we found that this private equity group was heavily invested in a firm called Darktrace, which was set up by the British intelligence establishment. So huge conflicts of interest. She has never recused herself in the case, which is irregular in itself, because I've talked to lawyers who have said if there's any hint of conflict of interest, judges will recuse themselves very early on, but she never has.
It's constant. It's constant. Yeah. We've had this issue before with Belmarsh as well. Apparently they didn't know about the booth.
So this is a constant problem, whether I'll turn up for a prison visit with him down at the prison and they won't have brought him out, which means I sit there on my own for an hour while he's coming in, or while we're coming into the prison, there's delays getting in because there's huge queues and security's not working properly. So I don't actually get in to see him until half an hour after the actual visit time has started, and he's sitting there on his own wondering whether anyone's turning up. And it just means that a 2-hour visit ends up being only an hour or less, and we lose time. And so, or we turn up to court being told that we'll have the whole day with him, and instead when we get there we're told, no, actually there's no facilities, you can only have an hour with him. And this has been constant for months and months and months on end, which has really limited our ability to get through any of the evidence with him. This is a hugely complicated case with a huge amount of evidence to get through.
Assange is a symbol, really, of the American state's affront at having its secrets put out in the public domain. You know, that's what it comes down to, and it's why I think of it as a political case. He's been blamed for a whole series of things which are patently untrue, but the impetus behind the extradition request has not stopped, which tells you it wasn't to do with those things. It's about high politics and him being a symbol of what they see as an assault on the American state. But most of the rest of the world will see as legitimate journalism.
Now, what makes you think Julian Assange is going to get justice in the United States, in a court in East Virginia, where the jury is selected from a population where 85% are employed by CIA, NSA, DOD, or DOS?
I hired O.J. Simpson's jury consultant in my case. He has never lost a case. He represented O.J. Simpson and William Kennedy Smith and George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin case. He's a winner. And we got him a security clearance. He came to Washington and he reviewed all the documents. And at the end of it, he said to me, if we were in any other district in America besides the Eastern District of Virginia, I would say, let's go for it. We're going to win. But the Eastern District of Virginia, he said, your jury would be made up of people from the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, and intelligence community contractors or their family members. He said, you don't stand a chance in the Eastern District of Virginia. That's why they charged you there. I fear the same thing for Julian, that they charged him in the Eastern District of Virginia because it's called the espionage court, because no national security defendant has ever won a case there.
And when we see now how the British judiciary, who has a long tradition of rule of law, a proud tradition of that, has delivered a complete travesty of a trial, where the defendant has not had the right to prepare his defense, where he has not had access to his own lawyers, where we have court judges refusing to consider objections for conflicts of interest. Even in the UK, he's not going to get a fair extradition trial. So this is no longer in the hands of the judiciary. The judiciary is unwilling or unable to deal with this according to the rule of law. This is now in the hands of the public and in the hands of the media to inform the public about what is going on.
On February the 24th, 2020, the first part of Julian Assange's extradition hearing took place.
I'm here from Reporters Without Borders. We've been monitoring all week. Today, we were again concerned about Mr. Assange's well-being. And frankly, the treatment is dehumanizing. The fact that he is an afterthought almost. Twice now this week, proceedings have started without a realization that he was not even yet present.
Julian is not receiving a fair hearing. To start with, he can hardly and barely hear what's going on in the courtroom. He cannot communicate with his lawyers without being observed and overheard by officials from the State Department, from the embassy, and from the Eastern District Court of Virginia. So how can he actually have a fair opportunity? And he, as he said, when he was attempted to communicate with the judge, there's been enough spying on the communication between me and my lawyer.
The remainder of the extradition hearing recommences on September 7th, 2020. Due to COVID restrictions, Assange has not been allowed to see his lawyers in over 6 months. On June 24th, the US Department of Justice published a replacement superseding indictment on its website, but it was only delivered to the court 3.5 weeks before the hearing and after the deadline to present new evidence had come and gone. This left Assange and his defense team with little time to adequately prepare a defense. Facing 175 years in prison, Julian Assange will likely not see his lawyers until the day of the hearing.
This is not about left or right in politics. We can unite on this. Please tell everybody that you know that they have to side with Assange and fight against the extradition. If they tell you, I would rather fight for the environment or against animal cruelty or gender equality, tell them they are about to take every right away from you. You will not be able to fight for any other cause. We are talking about the fundamentals here. We must fight against the extradition. We must save Julian Assange.